The stars had always whispered their secrets to those who cared to listen. For eons, humanity had gazed into the night sky, dreaming of what lay beyond the black expanse. But no one could have predicted what would arrive on the heels of those same stars. In the year 2034, Earth was still reeling from the effects of climate change, political turmoil, and economic collapse. Nations were in disarray, and humanity had barely clung to its place on the planet. But the alien fleet that descended from the heavens had no intention of waiting for humanity to fix its problems. They had come to conquer. The first signs came as a flicker in the skies, an anomaly spotted by a handful of observatories. At first, they thought it was a comet or a rogue asteroid, but when the object didn't follow any known orbital pattern, suspicion turned into panic. The truth was worse than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just a single ship that arrived. The skies were soon filled with enormous vessels, their sleek, otherworldly designs dwarfing anything humanity had ever built. The aliens were here, and they were far more advanced than Earth's most optimistic predictions. The world went into chaos as governments scrambled to react. A collective voice rose from the ashes of confusion. News outlets streamed reports, each station more frantic than the last. Nations' defense forces were mobilized, but deep down, everyone knew it was too late. Humanity, fragmented and disorganized, was not ready for this. The invaders, who came to be known as the Nar, descended upon Earth's major cities with terrifying precision. Their ships released their troops, an army of sleek, humanoid creatures with translucent, bioluminescent skin, their eyes glowing with a cold intelligence. Their weapons unleashed devastating bursts of energy, wiping entire blocks of buildings from existence in mere seconds. As they moved, they took no prisoners, enslaving humanity by force. But there was something the Nar had overlooked. Despite the desperation that had swept through Earth's people, a fierce resolve began to grow. Beneath the surface of human despair, a primal instinct stirred. Humans had always been survivors, ever since their earliest days on the savannah. They had adapted, learned, and fought their way to the top of the food chain. And now, in the face of extinction, that same spirit was awakening once more. Across the globe, pockets of resistance began to form. At first, they were nothing more than small, scattered groups of civilians with little more than crude weapons, hunting rifles, homemade explosives, and the kind of makeshift technology they had developed in desperation. But in this chaotic, desperate time, something remarkable happened. Humanity began to fight back. In Washington, D.C., a former Marine named Daniel Hayes took command of a small resistance group. His team had been fighting for months, hiding in the city's underground tunnels, launching guerrilla attacks against the Nar, picking off stragglers, and sabotaging their supply chains. They were far from an organized army, but they were determined, and that counted for something. "We may not have the tech, the weapons, or the numbers," Daniel said to his team one night, as they gathered around a dimly lit table in a hidden bunker. "But we have something they don't have, a will to survive. And that's what's going to take them down." His team was made up of all kinds, former soldiers, scientists, engineers, and ordinary civilians. Each one brought something vital to the table. The scientists began working on makeshift EMP devices to disrupt the aliens' technology. The engineers helped construct makeshift armor, and the civilians offered their local knowledge to help locate Nar positions. All across the world, similar resistance groups were forming. From the sewers of Paris to the dense jungles of South America, humanity was starting to push back. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the Nar take notice. Their initial arrogance began to crack. They had expected Earth to be easy prey, a species divided, unaware, and weak. They had not expected a response. And that response was growing, even in the face of overwhelming odds. In the heart of the largest Nar-controlled city, a massive force gathered at dawn. Alien warships hovered over the ground, casting long shadows over the terrified humans below. Their commanders issued a final ultimatum: surrender or face annihilation. But as the Nar fleet prepared for their next devastating move, a signal was sent from the human resistance to every corner of the Earth. It was simple, yet powerful. The message was clear: we fight. We fight not for ourselves, but for everything we built, for our children, for our home. We fight with everything we have. The battle for Earth had just begun. The message had spread across the globe like wildfire. In cities where people once cowered under the shadow of the Nar, there was now a flicker of defiance in their eyes. From the largest metropolises to the smallest villages, humans began to rise up, armed with nothing more than their sheer will to survive. What the invaders had underestimated was the power of unity, a force that even the mightiest empire could not easily crush. In the ruins of New York City, where the alien forces had already established a stronghold, a small resistance cell led by Claire Simmons gathered in secret. Claire had once been a city planner, a woman who had mapped out the urban landscape with a meticulous eye for detail. Now, she was one of the most skilled tacticians in the human resistance. Along with her team, she had been coordinating underground operations, hitting alien supply depots, and extracting important intel. Tonight, though, was different. Claire stared at the holographic map projected on the table before her, tracing the alien forces' movements. The Nar had a chokehold on the city, but they weren't invincible. Their technology, though vastly superior, had one glaring weakness: their reliance on an alien energy core, a power source that could be exploited if the resistance could gain access. "Tonight, we hit them hard," Claire said, her voice steady but fierce. "We take down the Nar's power hub. If we can take out their main source of energy, the whole city will go dark. That'll give us the opening we need to cripple their command structure." The team nodded, understanding the stakes. Every move they made now was more than a battle. It was a fight for survival. They were no longer fighting for a better life. They were fighting to ensure humanity had any life at all. Meanwhile, in the icy tundras of Siberia, the last of Russia's once powerful military had become an unlikely ally in the resistance. General Ivan Petrov, a man who had spent most of his life commanding vast armies, found himself at the helm of a ragtag group of survivors, former soldiers, civilians, and even farmers who had picked up rifles in the face of annihilation. Despite his stern, no-nonsense demeanor, General Petrov had a deep understanding of what was at stake. "These Nar believe they can crush us like insects," he said, standing over a war map laid out on the cold ground of their underground base. "They are wrong." His hands hovered over the map, highlighting key sites in the region where the Nar had been spreading their influence. It was critical that these outposts were destroyed, or the Nar would turn Siberia into their launch pad for further invasions. Petrov had come to realize that every victory, no matter how small, was a vital part of the larger war effort. It was a lesson he learned from the survivors around him, people who had lost everything yet still fought with an unrelenting fire. Their fight was their gift to the future, and Petrov would ensure that it wasn't squandered. Back in North America, Daniel Hayes and his ragtag band of guerrillas had been making progress in Washington, D.C., although their efforts had not come without sacrifice. Their small victories had been met with brutal retaliation from the Nar, who had quickly adapted to human tactics. But despite the heavy losses, Daniel had seen something in the eyes of his people that could not be extinguished: hope. "Listen up," Daniel addressed his team as they prepared for yet another strike. "The Nar thought they could scare us into submission, but they're starting to realize we're not going down without a fight. We've got the element of surprise, and that's something they don't expect. This time, we're going after their command center. We cut off the head, and the body falls." The team had spent days mapping out the intricate alien defenses around their target, a heavily fortified facility in the heart of the city. Daniel's plan was simple but dangerous: get in, plant explosives, and get out before the Nar realized what was happening. Time was of the essence, and every minute counted. As they moved through the darkened streets, their stealth tactics kept them hidden from the watchful eyes of the Nar patrols. They had learned the hard way that the Nar's superior technology could see through most of their attempts to remain undetected. But tonight, they had one advantage: the Nar's overconfidence. "We'll make them regret ever landing on this planet," Daniel muttered under his breath as he led the team through the shadows. Far from the battlefields, the scientists of the resistance were making their own advancements. Dr. Elena Vargas, a leading physicist, had spent countless hours in hidden labs, researching the NAR technology they had managed to recover. Every scrap of alien tech that fell into human hands was a potential key to victory. If humanity could reverse engineer their technology, they could turn the tide. Elena had just made a breakthrough. A small, portable device, a form of energy disruptor, was in its final stages of testing. It could disable the NAR's advanced energy shields, leaving them vulnerable for short periods of time. It wasn't much, but in a war of attrition, even a small advantage could make all the difference. As she stood in front of the glowing prototype, Elena allowed herself a rare smile. This is just the beginning. The battle for Earth had entered a new phase. What had begun as scattered, desperate acts of defiance were now morphing into a worldwide insurrection. The NAR, though still overwhelmingly powerful, were starting to realize that this would not be an easy conquest. Humanity's resolve was beginning to show in the cracks of their technological superiority. Daniel Hayes stood in a dimly lit war room beneath the broken streets of Washington, D.C. His team had just completed the most dangerous mission to date, striking a key in our command center deep within the heart of the city. The explosions had been timed perfectly, taking out half of the alien leadership in one fell swoop. But, as expected, the NAR had retaliated with a vengeance. "Reports are coming in from all over the city," Daniel said, his voice cold as he reviewed a digital map on the table. "They've tightened their grip on the capital. They're sending in reinforcements, and we're running out of time to exploit their weakness." One of his top operatives, Maya, a former hacker, looked up from her console, eyes bloodshot from the days without sleep. "We've also intercepted a transmission. They're planning something big, something we haven't seen yet. If we don't stop it, everything we've done will be for nothing." "Explain," Daniel demanded. Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up a series of alien schematics. "It's a weapon, something they've been working on since they first arrived. They've been hiding it in plain sight under the guise of a research facility. But this is no ordinary weapon. It's capable of disabling all human technology within a 50-mile radius." A silence fell over the room. If the NAR activated this weapon, humanity would be sent back to the Dark Ages, cut off from communication, weapons, and the ability to organize. It would be a crippling blow. "We can't let that happen," Daniel said, his eyes narrowing with determination. "We go in. We hit them before they can deploy it." In the rugged mountains of the Himalayas, General Ivan Petrov stood atop a ridge, staring into the distance. A convoy of resistance fighters had just arrived, bringing with them crucial intel that could change the course of the war. "We've got word from D.C., one of his officers reported. Daniel Hayes and his team have just taken out a major NAR base. They're planning to disable the NAR's ability to deploy their most dangerous weapon. But they need help." Petrov's weathered face broke into a grim smile. "Then we'll give it to them." It had been a long time since he had commanded an army, but now, standing on the frozen terrain of Siberia, surrounded by the remnants of his country's military might, he felt something stirring deep within him. The battle was shifting in humanity's favor, and he was determined to see it through to the end. "Prepare the forces," he ordered. "We'll launch a joint operation. The NAR think they've crushed us. They'll be surprised when we hit them from every direction." Back in Washington, Claire Simmons and her team were getting ready for the mission that could alter the course of the war. They had learned that the NAR's research facility wasn't just a weapons lab. It was the heart of their operations in North America. Destroying it would not only halt the weapon, but would cripple the NAR's infrastructure, forcing them to regroup and retreat. Claire leaned over the map, her fingers tracing the path they would need to take. The NAR had established a series of perimeter defenses around the facility, and getting in undetected would be nearly impossible. But Claire had faith in her team. They had pulled off impossible missions before. "We hit them fast, hit them hard," Claire said, her voice calm but resolute. "We move in the dead of night. No time for hesitation. We either take that facility or die trying." The team nodded. They knew what was at stake. The NAR, meanwhile, were not sitting idly by. Their commanders had been watching the Resistance's movements with growing concern. Each failed operation, every loss they sustained, chipped away at their once unshakable confidence. But they were still confident in one thing: their ability to wipe out humanity in a single decisive strike. In the heart of the NAR command ship, the High Commander sat in his chair, staring out at the swirling void of space. The Resistance had been persistent, but he was no longer worried about them. He had a plan, one that would turn the tide of the war and ensure Earth's subjugation. "Activate the Nexus," the High Commander ordered, his voice cold and commanding. The Nexus was the NAR's ultimate weapon, a powerful energy beam capable of erasing entire cities from existence in a single blast. The weapon was capable of destroying Earth's most advanced defense systems, wiping out entire cities, and sending humanity into a state of disarray and despair. The NAR intended to use it as a final blow to crush the Resistance once and for all. But as the weapon powered up, a small spark of hope flickered in the Resistance's plans. In the quiet of her lab, Dr. Elena Vargas stood before a chalkboard filled with equations, her mind racing. The NAR had underestimated one thing: human ingenuity. She had been working on something that could disrupt the Nexus weapon, the energy pulse that powered it. But it would take time to perfect it. The ticking of the clock echoed in her mind as she quickly scribbled down a few more formulas. She was close, so close. If she could perfect the disruptor in time, they could disable the Nexus before it fired. But it would take precision, and it would take a sacrifice. Elena knew the cost of such a weapon. It would require all of the human Resistance's remaining energy reserves, and the toll on those who wielded it could be devastating. But she had no other choice. "We have to try," Elena murmured to herself, her fingers trembling as they worked furiously. "We have to." As the NAR prepared for the final blow, humanity's hope had not only survived, it had become a weapon in itself. From the shattered cities of the world to the icy plains of Siberia, from the underground bunkers of Washington to the quiet labs of scientists like Elena, humanity was rallying. The war was no longer about survival. It was about reclaiming the planet. And this time, the NAR would not be the ones who decided Earth's fate. The battle for Earth had reached a fever pitch. The NAR, confident in their ultimate weapon, the Nexus, believed they were on the cusp of ending humanity's defiance once and for all. Their fleets hovered ominously over Earth's major cities, casting long shadows over a planet brimming with resistance. But humanity was not about to go quietly into the night. In Washington, D.C., Daniel Hayes and his team were gearing up for their most dangerous mission yet. After successfully striking the NAR Command Center, they had learned of the Nexus weapon, and it was now clear that the only way to end this war was to stop the NAR from using it. "We're running out of time," Daniel said, his eyes focused on the flickering maps displayed before him. "The Nexus is almost ready for deployment, and it can destroy entire cities in one shot. We can't let them get a clean shot." Claire Simmons, who had joined forces with Daniel after the assault on the NAR facility in D.C., glanced at the mission briefing. The Nexus weapon was located on a floating NAR city that had been established high above the atmosphere, an imposing citadel, shielded by powerful energy fields that made direct assault nearly impossible. "It's going to take everything we've got to break through," Claire said, her voice steady despite the weight of the mission. "But if we can get inside and disable their power core, we can shut the whole thing down." Daniel nodded grimly. "I've got no illusions about this. This is a one-way trip." The tension in the room was palpable as Daniel's team prepared for the assault. They had trained for months in the harshest conditions: underground bunkers, hostile environments, and guerrilla warfare tactics. Now, they were up against the greatest technological challenge humanity had ever faced: the Nexus. Far from D.C., across the vastness of the Siberian wilderness, General Ivan Petrov's forces were assembling. Petrov had seen war before. He had commanded legions of soldiers in the past, but never like this. He had seen cities fall, had watched as whole nations crumbled. But never had he seen a force so determined, so driven by sheer will to survive. The NAR had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to turn the tide when all seemed lost. Every second counts, Petrov muttered as he paced along the front lines. His army, composed of former soldiers, civilians, and desperate survivors, was preparing for an assault on a critical NAR supply depot. The depot held resources the NAR would need to sustain their occupation, and if they could destroy it, it could cripple the aliens' forces on Earth. Petrov had already planned several contingency operations, all designed to ensure that if the first wave of attacks failed, there would be another chance. He had no room for failure. His forces, though smaller, were battle-hardened. The NAR might have superior technology, but humanity had something that the NAR lacked: a fierce determination and the ability to improvise. "I will not let them destroy everything we built," Petrov said, his voice barely a whisper in the wind. "Not while we still have breath." In the underground labs of the Resistance, Dr. Elena Vargas was working feverishly to finalize the energy disruptor she had designed to disable the Nexus weapon. The device was still in its testing phase, but Elena had a sinking feeling in her gut. She needed more time, and time was a luxury that humanity did not have. The tests had been promising, but Elena was not satisfied with the results. She had to tweak the power output, adjust the frequency, and recalibrate the internal stabilizers. If she could just get the device to work on the first attempt, they could neutralize the NARS weapon before it activated. "There's no time left," Elena murmured to herself as she made her final adjustments. She looked at the device, knowing that it might be the last hope for all of humanity. Her fingers hovered over the activation button, and then she pressed it. The device hummed to life, and the small screen in front of her flashed green. "It's working," Elena whispered, but her voice was filled with disbelief. "It's actually working." She didn't have time to celebrate. There was no time for anything except getting the disruptor into the right hands. Back on the floating NAR city, the Nexus weapon was now fully operational. The High Commander stood in the command center, staring at the massive energy readings on the console before him. His forces had successfully fended off numerous attacks, and he had no doubt that the human resistance would try one last desperate move to stop him. "They think they can stop us," the High Commander said, his voice tinged with arrogance. "But they are nothing compared to the power we wield. Let them come." The NAR had underestimated humanity's resilience, and it would be their downfall. The High Commander's confidence was unwavering, but deep down, even he could feel the tension in the air. Something had changed in the way humanity fought. They were no longer desperate. They were determined. In DC, Daniel and his team made their final preparations. The mission was now in full swing, and they would either succeed or perish trying. The streets were eerily quiet, the city still reeling from the previous assaults. "Here we go," Daniel muttered as they stepped into the heart of the city, their bodies encased in makeshift armor. The NAR had reinforced their defenses, but Daniel's team had learned to adapt. They moved swiftly, keeping low, using the cover of the wreckage around them to avoid detection. But the moment they arrived at the base of the NAR's floating citadel, they saw the enormity of the challenge before them. The floating city loomed above them, an impenetrable fortress. The air crackled with energy as the NAR prepared for their final strike. "We're running out of time," Maya said, her voice trembling with urgency. "The Nexus is going live in less than an hour." Daniel looked up at the looming citadel. "Then we move fast. We take it down now or we're done." As the resistance forces around the world prepared for their final offensive, the NAR began their countdown to annihilation. The Nexus weapon was poised to fire, and Earth's fate hung in the balance. Humanity had one last shot. Everything they had fought for, every sacrifice made, would culminate in this final, desperate effort to save their world. The breaking point was upon them, and it would either make or break the future of Earth. The atmosphere was thick with tension as Daniel Hayes and his team stood before the colossal NAR citadel, their eyes fixed on the towering fortress that hovered above the ruins of Washington, D.C. The countdown to the Nexus weapons activation was rapidly ticking away, and they knew they had mere minutes to stop it. Every second that passed could be their last. "We don't have time for any more delays," Maya said, her voice tight with anxiety. "If we don't breach the perimeter now, It'll be too late. Daniel glanced at his team, each of them steeling themselves for the task at hand. Their mission was simple, but deadly. Infiltrate the floating citadel, disable the Nexus weapon, and get out before the Nar could retaliate. The odds were against them, and the enemy's technology was far superior. But they had one thing the Nar could never understand: the unwavering human spirit. "We move as one," Daniel said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "We go in, hit their power core, and we make sure they never fire that weapon." Claire Simmons, now fully armored and prepared for the assault, looked up at the sky. The Nar had begun to launch more ships in response to the Resistance's growing attacks. They had expected this final strike, but what they didn't anticipate was just how much humanity was willing to risk to protect their world. The team activated their jetpacks, silently lifting off the ground and flying toward the citadel with precision. The Nar had set up a series of force fields around their city, but humanity's resourcefulness had found a way around it. The small EMP devices Daniel's team had modified over the last few weeks would temporarily disable the alien shields, just long enough to make their entry. As they neared the perimeter of the citadel, a pulse of energy shot out from one of the Nar ships, narrowly missing them. "We're not alone," Claire shouted as she pulled the trigger on her pulse rifle, taking down the scout drone that had attempted to alert the rest of the fleet. "Push forward," Daniel commanded, his voice urgent as the EMP detonated, briefly scrambling the alien shields. The team flew through the gap, entering the darkened corridors of the citadel. The air felt heavy with tension, the hum of alien technology reverberating through the walls. Meanwhile, far above the atmosphere, the High Commander watched the Resistance's attempt to infiltrate his citadel with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. He had expected this. Humans always did this, always thinking they could defy the inevitable. But he had grown confident in the Nexus. "If they think they can stop us now, they are gravely mistaken," the High Commander muttered. He motioned to his officers. "Activate the planetary defense systems. Keep them occupied until the Nexus is ready." The Nar commanders scattered as they initiated the defense protocols. The citadel was a fortress, but even they knew the humans would find ways to get inside. The Nar were preparing to strike back with overwhelming force. Back on Earth, General Ivan Petrov's forces were moving into position. They had successfully infiltrated the Nar's rear lines and were now striking at their most vulnerable targets: supply depots and communication hubs. Petrov stood at the command of his soldiers as they descended on a Nar base hidden deep within the Russian tundra. "This is the moment we take back what's ours," Petrov said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. The Russian forces were an unpredictable wild card, scrappy, disorganized, but incredibly resourceful. They had fought through some of the toughest conditions imaginable, and now they would fight their hardest yet. "The Nar can't control us if we cut off their supplies," Petrov continued. "We're going to make them regret ever coming here." The soldiers launched a barrage of explosives, disrupting the Nar's critical infrastructure. The base went up in flames, signaling to the rest of the world that humanity was not backing down. This was no longer a war of survival. It was a war of liberation. Back in the heart of the Nar citadel, Daniel and his team moved quickly, guided by the limited intel they had gathered. They knew the layout of the facility. Every corner, every hallway was mapped out in their minds. The Nar would be coming for them soon, but for now, they had one goal: the Nexus core. "Almost there," Claire said, her voice tight as they approached the central chamber. The walls were lined with alien machinery, pulsing with blue energy. The Nexus core sat at the heart of it all, a massive crystalline structure, its surface crackling with raw power. The heart of the Nar's final weapon. "Get ready," Daniel ordered, unslinging the explosive charges from his pack. "We disable the power core, and then we get out." But just as they were about to plant the first charge, a voice boomed through the chamber, resonating with a cold, alien authority. "You will not succeed, humans." The High Commander's voice echoed through the citadel, amplified by the walls. His presence filled the room, and for a moment, Daniel's team froze, realizing the enormity of what they were about to do. Before they could react, a series of Nar soldiers materialized from the shadows, their weapons aimed at the intruders. "Take them down," the High Commander ordered, his voice full of contempt. The team sprang into action. Gunfire erupted, and the hum of energy shields filled the air. The humans were outnumbered, but they fought with ferocity. Claire's rifle sent pulses of light streaking through the air, cutting down several Nar soldiers, while Maya worked furiously to override the alien security systems. "We don't have much time," Maya shouted. "The Nexus is ready to fire." With no choice but to press forward, Daniel dove for the core and planted the first charge. Explosions rang out as the device began to activate. The Nar were relentless, but Daniel's team held their ground. Outside, Petrov's forces were pushing the Nar back, their relentless assault keeping the enemy distracted just long enough for Daniel's team to complete their mission. The war for Earth was escalating into a final, monumental confrontation. The Nar might have been technologically superior, but humanity had something far greater: the will to fight for their home. The countdown was ticking. Time was running out, but as Daniel placed the last charge, the Nar forces were closing in. Their final defense had been triggered, and now it was a race against time. The pulse of energy in the Nar citadel flickered and died. The hum of the Nexus weapon, a sound that had haunted humanity for months, faded into nothingness. For a brief moment, the team of resistance fighters stood in stunned silence, trying to comprehend what they had just achieved. The Nar were still reeling from the explosion that had disabled their most powerful weapon. But they weren't defeated yet. The citadel was crumbling, and the Nar forces were closing in from all sides, determined to eliminate every last human in their path. "Move," Daniel Hayes shouted, snapping his team out of their daze. "Get to the extraction point, now." The team didn't need to be told twice. They sprinted toward the exit, their boots pounding against the metallic floors as alarms blared around them. The Nar soldiers were already regrouping, their weapons trained on the resistance fighters. But this time, there was no fear in the humans' eyes. They had made it this far, and they weren't going to stop now. As they made their way through the maze of hallways, Daniel's mind raced. The Nexus had been shut down, but that didn't mean the war was over. The Nar were still a formidable force, and now they would be furious. Humanity had taken a huge step forward, but there was no denying the truth. They had to finish what they started. "We're not done yet," Daniel muttered under his breath, pushing forward. "We need to take them out once and for all." Outside, General Ivan Petrov's forces were locked in a fierce battle with the Nar. The Russian forces had gained a foothold in the Nar supply lines, but the enemy was relentless. The Nar were now fully aware of the threat humanity posed, and they were fighting with everything they had. Petrov stood at the front lines, his eyes focused on the distant smoke rising from the burning Nar installations. The war had taken a heavy toll, but the resistance was not backing down. "We hold them here," Petrov growled, gripping his weapon tightly. "This is where we take back everything they've stolen from us. This is where we win." His soldiers pushed forward, overwhelming the Nar forces with their sheer numbers and tenacity. The Nar were technologically superior, but Petrov had seen firsthand the strength of the human spirit. And in this moment, it was enough to turn the tide of the battle. Back in the Nar citadel, Daniel and his team were nearing the exit, but the walls seemed to close in around them. The Nar had activated their final line of defense, an elite squadron of soldiers equipped with the most advanced weapons the aliens had to offer. "They know we're here," Maya hissed, as she worked to hack into the Citadel's communication network. "They're tracking us. We have no way out." "Then we fight our way out," Claire said, her eyes flashing with determination. Daniel nodded. "They may have the technology, but we have the heart. Let's show them what we're made of." The team regrouped, taking cover behind the wreckage of the Citadel's infrastructure. The Nar soldiers appeared in the corridor, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. But the humans were ready. Gunfire rang out as Daniel and his team engaged the enemy. The Nar soldiers fought with precision and skill, but the humans fought with desperation and resolve. Every shot was aimed with purpose. Every move was calculated. In the chaos of battle, Daniel spotted a Nar officer, a towering figure with armor that shimmered like liquid metal. He recognized the officer from previous encounters. This was no ordinary soldier. This was one of the Nar commanders. Without hesitation, Daniel charged forward, weaving through the hail of gunfire. The Nar officer turned to face him, raising a massive energy blade. Their eyes locked for a moment, man versus alien. The clash was brutal. The Nar officer swung the blade in a sweeping arc, but Daniel was faster, ducking under the attack and delivering a swift blow to the alien's chest. The Nar staggered back, but its superior strength allowed it to recover quickly. It swung again, but this time Daniel was ready. With a well-timed strike, Daniel drove his knife into the officer's side, piercing the weak spot in its armor. The Nar let out a screech of pain as it fell to the ground, its weapon slipping from its grasp. For a moment, the battlefield fell silent. Daniel stood over the fallen officer, breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. The fight wasn't over, but this victory felt significant. It was a sign. The Nar could be defeated. Keep moving, Daniel shouted, breaking the moment of stillness. We've got to get out of here. Back outside the citadel, Petrov's forces had breached the final defenses of the Nar, breaking through their lines and pushing them back. The Russian general stood on the front lines, watching the battle unfold. We've got them, Petrov said, a fierce smile tugging at his lips. This is it. The Nar, despite their advanced technology, were being overwhelmed by the sheer willpower of the human resistance. But there was one final obstacle left to overcome, the Nar's flagship, still orbiting above the planet, ready to unleash devastating firepower on Earth's remaining cities. The flagship was protected by a powerful energy shield, but Petrov knew the resistance had one final chance to take it down. He turned to his command staff. We need to strike the flagship now, or the Nexus won't be the last of it. A series of fighter jets, piloted by the most skilled members of the resistance, were already en route. They would have one chance to breach the flagship's defenses and bring it down before the Nar could launch another devastating attack. Inside the Nar citadel, Daniel and his team were finally nearing the exit. The explosion had caused massive structural damage to the facility, and it was only a matter of time before it collapsed completely. But the team's mission was clear. They had to survive and get the information they had gathered back to the rest of the resistance. We're almost there, Claire said, her voice tense as she kept watch over the rear. But we need to move faster. The Nar soldiers were regrouping, and their numbers were growing. The team needed to escape before the entire citadel became their tomb. Suddenly, a loud explosion rocked the structure, sending debris tumbling down from above. The entire citadel shuddered, and alarms blared louder than ever. We need to get out of here now, Daniel shouted, pushing his team forward. The exit was within reach, but so were the Nar. It was a race against time. The Nar were closing in, but Daniel and his team had come too far to fail now. They sprinted toward the exit, hoping the future of humanity was just beyond that final door. The citadel was crumbling. The deafening explosions, the rumble of collapsing walls, and the shrill alarms filled the air as Daniel and his team dashed for the exit. Every step they took seemed to push them closer to the brink of disaster, but they couldn't stop now. The fate of Earth was in their hands. We're almost there, Claire yelled, her voice strained with urgency. They could see the exit ahead, a small gap in the citadel's exterior, just large enough for them to squeeze through. But the Nar were relentless. Their forces were closing in from every direction, and despite the damage to the facility, they had the advantage of numbers and firepower. The countdown to the next wave of destruction was ticking down, and the Nexus weapon had been neutralized. But there was still one threat left, the Nar flagship orbiting above. I'll cover the rear, Maya said, her rifle raised as she fired at the advancing Nar soldiers. You go. I'll hold them off. No time, Daniel barked. We move as one. But Maya wasn't about to back down. She turned, setting up an explosive charge near the entrance to the main hallway, then looked at Daniel with steely resolve. Go now. I'll catch up. Reluctantly, Daniel nodded. They couldn't waste time, but Maya's determination was undeniable. She would fight until the end. The rest of the team sprinted toward the gap in the Citadel's walls, the final barrier between them and freedom. Just as they neared the edge, another explosion shook the structure, sending debris crashing all around them. The Nar forces were closing in on them, their weapons blazing with deadly energy. "Go! Now!" Daniel shouted, pushing forward with every ounce of strength he had left. The team dove through the gap in the Citadel's walls, just as a massive shockwave from Maya's charge rippled through the building. The force of the explosion sent the entire structure into a violent tremor. The Citadel's foundations were collapsing, and the Nar soldiers were caught in the blast. But there was no time to look back. They had made it out. As they emerged into the open air, the smoke from the destroyed Citadel billowing into the sky, Daniel looked up at the horizon. The Nar flagship loomed overhead, its enormous form casting a shadow over the earth below. The Nar had yet to fully unleash their wrath, and Earth's cities were still at risk. But Daniel knew that victory was within their reach. He turned to the team, breathing heavily, sweat streaking his face. "This is it. We've crippled the Nexus. We've crippled their command center. Now we finish them." They still had one more task, to take down the Nar flagship. If they didn't neutralize it, the Nar could unleash another devastating strike on Earth. Back on the ground, General Ivan Petrov's forces were coordinating with the remaining resistance cells. Word had spread about the destruction of the Nexus, and humanity's spirit was rekindled. The Nar were losing ground fast, but there was still work to be done. "Let's finish this," Petrov said, a grim smile on his face as he surveyed the battlefield. For Earth. In space, the resistance pilots had gathered their forces for one final assault on the Nar flagship. The air was tense inside their cockpits as they prepared for the most dangerous mission of their lives. "We've got one shot at this," said Lieutenant Nora Calloway, leading the squadron. "Stay tight, follow my lead, and we'll bring that ship down." As they approached the flagship, the sheer size of the Nar ship became apparent. It was a massive, heavily armored vessel, brimming with energy weaponry. But the resistance had found a weak spot, a vulnerability in its shield system. The pilots had spent hours studying the schematics, and now it was time to act. "Ready?" Nora asked, glancing at her squadron. "On my mark, 3, 2, 1. They launched their assault, firing their weapons in perfect unison. The Nar flagship retaliated with intense firepower, but the resistance fighters weaved through the barrage, using their speed and agility to stay one step ahead. Nora's squadron closed in on the weak point, unleashing a barrage of concentrated fire. The flagship shuddered under the assault, its shield flickering. With a final powerful strike, the flagship's core exploded in a blinding flash of light. Back on Earth, the explosion was visible from miles away. The Nar flagship was no more. The alien invaders had lost their most powerful weapon, and their grip on Earth was beginning to slip. "We did it," Maya said, her voice hoarse but filled with relief as she joined Daniel and the others on the ground. "We really did it." Daniel looked up at the sky, the smoke from the destroyed flagship still rising. It wasn't over yet, but humanity had proven something undeniable. They had fought back against all odds, against the overwhelming might of the Nar, and they had won. "This is just the beginning," Daniel said, his voice filled with resolve. "We've beaten them, but now we rebuild." In the weeks that followed, humanity began the long process of recovery. Cities were rebuilt, governments reformed, and new alliances formed among the nations of Earth. The Nar forces had been driven from the planet, their ships scattered across the galaxy. The resistance had become more than just a group of fighters. It had become a symbol of unity, a testament to the indomitable will of humanity. The victory was hard-won, and the scars of war would remain for generations. But Earth had shown the universe that humans were not to be underestimated. Against all odds, humanity had not only survived, they had triumphed. And as Daniel Hayes looked out over the horizon, he knew that whatever came next, humanity would face it together. The future of Earth was theirs to shape. The dawn of a new world had begun.